Let's take a closer look now at what we can expect from the expo. Gordon Houden joins me now live from Beijing. He's the director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rachelle.
Now let's start with why China is hosting this expo and what the expectations are.
Well, it's quite unprecedented. I don't know of a case where a country has actually made such an organized effort to boost imports. But China, I think it's in their enlightened self-interest to begin to address some of the trade imbalances. And far better, in my view, to grow imports to China than to curb overall trade. I think there is a solution which can benefit both parties if those numbers can come up of exports and diversity of exports from other countries into the China market.
Now, being that this is the first of its kind for China, what's the significance of specifically focusing on imports, particularly at this point in time?
I think China's under a lot of pressure, fairly or unfairly, for the large surpluses it enjoys with many countries. Not all, mind you. This is a way of addressing those imbalances. But I think very importantly as well, it's not much of the world's economy is not made up of huge international companies that have the means to have an office in Beijing and to penetrate the very large and diverse China market. Much of the world's economy is run by small, medium-sized businesses that really don't know where to start. So giving them a one-stop shopping spot for Chinese importers, and where modestly sized companies as well as medium-sized ones can expose their wares, their options, their services to a vast number of Chinese who are interested in importing, that to me is a good start. We'll see, of course, in the results how well it works, but I think in principle it's a good thing.
Now, you mentioned some of these countries that do run trade deficits with China. What could this expo mean for them?
Well, I think for those countries that run a trade deficit, in my own country, Canada, that's certainly the case. It's true for the United States and many others. These things can't be turned around overnight. It's like a super tanker. These contracts are signed far in advance. The trade volumes are established. People know the products. These relationships take quite a while to develop. But you have to start somewhere. And if, for example, there's a buyer who comes to Shanghai from, let's say, Henan province, that spots a product, consumer product, industrial product, that he thinks would fit or she thinks would fit into their import profile, that could be the beginning of a long-term relationship. I would caution at expecting that the day that the expo closes, somehow there's going to be a dramatic change in the numbers. It just doesn't work that way. But hopefully over time, it might well begin to address some of those imbalances.
And are there particular sectors that you expect to see more representation than others at the expo?
It's true that some countries are well represented. I mean, the U.S. government is not sending representatives, although many large U.S. corporations are here. There's quite a few third world countries that are here that don't really, again, have representative offices in China. And the Chinese export business is focused largely on exports. So these companies and products aren't necessarily in the sights or in the visibility of the importers. So those non-traditional exports to the China market, or non-traditional imports, if you wish, to put it another way, this is a chance perhaps to begin to break down that pattern and increase overall trade without the idea of having to shrink Chinese exports. That's not the right way to balance the trade, in my view. The idea is to grow the other side of the equation.
Now, it also comes down to what Chinese consumers actually want in terms of goods and services. What are they most interested in?
Well, you raise a good point. I mean, not every good that's produced in another country, which may be for local taste or national taste, will necessarily find a market in China. I think that some of the easiest sectors would be in foodstuffs. Chinese are traveling frequently amongst the world. They're the world's most prolific travelers internationally now. They are exposed to different products. They may want to find some of the same things in their own stores. Clothing, consumer products, furniture, things that are different from what they might normally encounter in the China market. There may be an appeal of the exotic. These sorts of things, and the China market is so large that what might be a small importation for some of the Chinese companies can be huge for a tiny exporting country in a third world market. So they think that it can be transformational for some. But you make a very good point. Not every product produced abroad will have a market here. Chinese products are generally high quality. The domestic market is large and growing. not everything that would come from abroad is automatically going to have a preferential advantage here. Just the opposite may be the case.
All right, well, thank you so much for your insights, Professor Gordon Houden there of the University of Alberta and Director of its China Institute.